Hello and welcome to the next Future Leaders Group lunchtime training session. A little bit about the Future Leaders Group. We are a collection of individuals who are interested in open technologies, including open source software, open hardware, and open data. It includes a wide range of people that work in technology, intellectual property, outsourcing, procurement, data, coding and innovation, as well as private practice lawyers and in-house counsel that work in the technology sector and related fields. It operates under the direction of the OpenUK's Legal and Policy Committee and has a clear purpose to bring together and develop future leaders in legal and policy matters relating to open technology and to supporting and furthering the mission of the Legal and Policy Committee. The Future Leaders Group is currently co-chaired by me, Robert Grinnells, I'm from Field Fisher, and Katie Gibson from Bristow's, and we're both lawyers advising on technology and commercial matters. The group is always open to new ideas and to new members, whether getting involved in all of our activities or just dipping in and out of our various projects. I'm delighted to say today that we are glad to have with us Olivier Maes from Rancher Labs. He is the Managing Director of EMEA for Rancher Labs. Thank you for joining us today, Olivier, and thank you for your talk today. I believe you'll be giving us a talk on running a business based on open source.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
If we could hold questions till the end, we'll invite people on to ask them and come on video if they'd like to, or if you'd like to, you can drop them in the chat. And with that, I'll just hand over to you, Olivier.
Thank you, and thank you to all of those who took an hour or so to spend during the day to learn a little bit about how we're doing, how actually we built a business on something that is basically free, right? So just a quick word on myself. I'm the Managing Director of EMEA. That means that I actually am the commercial guy within the company. I'm supposed to build a revenue and a customer base on the top of a platform which has been developed by Rancher and has been put into the market totally free. So I'll cover today a little bit around how do we actually gain adoption, the traction within the community, the way that we launch our initiatives, and when it becomes a commercial product, what is the type of way that we have to monetize on that? And then, if you have questions, then please feel free to do some. I'll just jump right into it. Just maybe a little bit of a background. I don't really know who's on the call, so I don't know who the audience is, how familiar you are with technology, how familiar you are with Kubernetes and Rancher. But just as a company, we're about 5 to 6 years old. We're 100% open source. That means every single piece of technologies that we bring to the DevOps community is fully free. So it's not open core, it's fully open source. There's no difference between paid version or a free version. We're in the space which basically address the issue of managing the complexity of running multiple containers. So applications that are being redesigned in microservices are packaged in containers and then run on a desktop, on a laptop, or in the public cloud, in maybe a windmill or a car, and all this plethora of containers that are in an environment need to be managed in a proper way. And that's why our Kubernetes came into play. So Kubernetes is also an open source technology. For those who know, it was developed by Google a couple of years ago. And then there's a whole ecosystem of startups and larger companies that start to build value add on top of that. It's almost like a universal API for compute everywhere. So we've been around. We've had about more than 100 million downloads of the Rancher agents, and we have a lot of deployments. And then we have a subset of companies which are under enterprise subscription. And so the company is actually about to be acquired by another open source company called SUSE. So for those who don't know, SUSE is a competitor to Red Hat. It's a company that have been around for 28 years or so, and they've been open source as well, and they offer an enterprise version of the Linux operating system. So in terms of the story of the company, and because it will very much link to the nature of running an open source business. The company started in around 2014. It was created, actually, I used to work with the same founder. It was created by basically the same leadership team. And they used to have a technology which was doing infrastructure as a service, so basically managing the deployment of virtual machines, and then it moved into something that is now managing containers. They started, that was a big learning from their previous undertaking. The previous company that called Cloud.com was actually not an open source product, and at that time, for those who know, OpenStack also came into the market, which was an open source product. And then because of that, despite the product being inferior to Cloudstack, it actually had a lot of traction in the industry just because it was open source and then people could build around that. So this time around, they launched the product fully open source straight from the start, and it started to have a lot of adoption. There was a first version of the product in 2016, and then that was based on basically on Docker and Docker Swarm and Mesos, which were other container orchestration technologies that seemed that they would be the de facto standard at that time. But then Kubernetes came and the company pivoted quite drastically. Yeah, they decided to dismantle a very successful product that they had and to rebuild it to fit Kubernetes. And then basically it started to explode in terms of adoption. And, we're now around 200 people, about more than 300 people, actually around 400 customers. And then we have a whole bunch of product that are part of the portfolio that are all open source. So this whole notion of open source and the adoption of open source technology has really accelerated also with the whole cloud native way that the cloud native transformation that companies are going through, and cloud native is really this journey where all the customers are going through, which is about, okay, how do I redesign my applications so that these applications are not these big blocks of monolithic code, but actually become microservices which can talk to each other, and then multiple developers teams can work on these different services in parallel, and these services will talk to each other with a whole bunch of logic behind. But then that means that you can decompose an application and improve it without having to do big releases and then very long lead times between different functionalities or different version releases of a software. That also changed the development styles within these companies. Open source is widely adopted within the developer community, but also the way that developers work with IT operators is changing. So you see that continuous improvement and continuous delivery is the new way that software is being deployed and run. There's DevOps practices which are becoming very pervasive in these organizations. And then there's the third aspect, which is this infrastructure piece, which we are playing on, which is about how do you ensure that you also are able to deploy these applications in multiple environments, that you have infrastructure that becomes immutable, that there's totally agnostic whether you deploy an application on the edge of a network or in a car, whether you deploy it on a public cloud provider or whether you're in your own data center. And that's where containers as a packaging technology really has a lot of traction in that industry at the moment. So all our projects from the Rancher pieces of technology are included into a cloud native mindset of our customer and a cloud native transformation that they're going through. So in terms of where we fit within the technology stack, we sit on top of the infrastructure, right? So that means that the infrastructure is agnostic. Then you need a way to manage the deployment and the scaling and the security, the rules, the access control, all of that, all of these aspects which are important for IT operators to embrace open source and Kubernetes within their organization without having total chaos. So the management platform of Rancher includes multiple open source components from ourselves, from things which are technology that are available within the CNCF Foundation, which is the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, on which we sit on the board, and we provide a support for that platform. So the pieces of technology that are open source are threefold. So there's Kubernetes in itself is the de facto standard for running infrastructure. We have a piece of product which are certified distributions of Kubernetes. So we have one which is called Rancher Kubernetes Engine, which is for traditional deployment and building of Kubernetes clusters in the data center or in the cloud. And then we have a a lightweight version, which is called K3S, which is basically a distribution which is intended for environments where you don't have a lot of compute resource, not a lot of memory, and they run very well on the edge for IoT type of use cases. So that is, these two products are fully open source. They are projects which have been supported for a while. K3S has also been donated to the CNCF Foundation, and then we have this layer of management, which includes, again, different functionalities. And it's important that we use, if you look at the shared tooling and services, we also use a lot of open source technology to embed into our open source technology. So Prometheus is open source, Grafana is open source, Helm, Istio, these functions which all serve a purpose for the developers. So it's about monitoring, it's about logging, it's about how do you build the application, it's about how do you manage the services relationship between these different microservices of an application. It's about how do you manage storage in a containerized environment with Longhorn. Every one of these are open source, are free of charge, and many of them are vetted by the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. So that's really our I would say this is what we use to guide our future roadmap, because it actually looks at all the problems that needs to be solved in order to be fully cloud native for companies. So it's a great. It's also a non-profit, right? It's an organization which has lots of companies on it, but it really looks at every project and then graduate the project from one level to the other until it's a project which is enterprise ready, and then we would embed that into our technology. So the totality of the solution that we provide it's a management server, which is this big blue bar with lots of functions which are important for enterprises around policy management, security, these shared tooling and services. Then also, how do you manage version control? How do you audit? All this is actually not natively easily available within Kubernetes. So that's why we built this on top of it. We have a good UI. We simplified integrations, and we just basically offer a product which is easier to use than the native Kubernetes orchestration tool that was developed by Google. And we're not the only one. Other companies are doing that. There's a whole ecosystem around it. But the whole idea is to make sure that this powerful compute API of Kubernetes being able to use by enterprises much faster, and that the learning curve is less steep, and that they're able to onboard with the benefits of Kubernetes in a much more controlled way. So the way that we, as an open source company, the way that we launch innovations within the community is that we start with everything is an open source project. So within Rancher, all our engineers in the company have the right to develop their own new innovation. So some things have come out of the head of our chief technology officer. He's a great brain. He's all constantly busy trying to figure out what are challenges and issues that we face on the infrastructure side for developers with Kubernetes, and then code something. And then what we do is we bring this to GitHub, and then we assess the adoption by the community. Right? We look how many stars it's get, how many adopters, and we've seen, for instance, the adoption of K3S, the lightweight Kubernetes distribution, has been much faster than the initial adoption of Rancher. So Rancher did well, right? We had a big growth, but then you see that K3S is actually growing at twice as fast, and that means that it solves a real problem. It has interest in where Kubernetes is going with the edge and IoT use cases. And what we do is we'll leave the projects there as open source projects for a couple of months, sometimes for a year. And then we will work with the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. We figure out, well, is this a project that we could donate to the CNCF Foundation? Because if you donate it to the CNCF Foundation, it gets credibility, it gets visibility, there's more people downloading it, there's more people trying it out, and ultimately it improves the quality of the product because we can get the feedback of that community on an ongoing basis. So one of our founders sits on the board of the CNCF Foundation for that reason, and was one of the founding members of that board a couple of years ago. And so what we see is all these projects, so Rancher, K3S, the Rancher Kubernetes engine, Longhorn from a storage perspective, they were all open source projects before they graduated within Rancher to a supported product. And some of them have not graduated yet. So Fleet, for instance, which has been built to manage thousands or hundreds of thousands of single node deployments, really intended for an IoT use case, will promote as a product in the next couple of weeks. And the rest is actually quite not there yet, right? So there are interesting functionalities. It could be that they drop off if ultimately something better comes into the open source community, but everything will always be vetted bottom up before we actually decide to put it as a support product. Now, I wanted to say something around the way that we engage with the community. So the open source community is massive, and what is really important in that community is it's all about the content. You know, we have a very, very big focus on providing relevant content, building a community, having an engagement way with the developers community and the DevOps community through content that will help them learn about not just Rancher. Actually, Rancher is just a small part of that, but the biggest and the most important piece is, let's reflect on what's happening in the Kubernetes ecosystem in general. So we have a colleague of ours, Adrian Goins, who's been our key evangelist in the company. So he's been given pretty much free hand to build the way that he wants to. So he started to build his own YouTube channel. He built this cloud native compute network community, which is his own community whereby people can just join, chat about issues. It's not really backed up by any company. It doesn't have any other interest than just bringing people, just like we're doing today, basically, right? Bringing people with a common interest on cloud native, on Kubernetes, to have conversation, to ask questions. And then he has this series of content which he calls Coffee and Cloud Native, and it's with lots of humor. It covers topics like security, monitoring, and logging. It introduces, he browses the internet for the community and flags interesting new technology to new companies, new announcements. So it is really, if you're into that world and you want to have a daily update on what's going on, it's there, right? And that's a lot of work. I mean, for us, it's a huge undertaking, right? Because you need to have someone who has a studio, you need to have someone who understands this field very well, and then he's on our payroll, but actually he's not a Rancher advocate. He's a cloud native advocate, and then we will inject some Rancher content here and there. But the reality is that the most important piece is that he becomes an authority in that space. So that is something that we're doing in terms of managing the community. We've launched something really interesting as well, which is an academy, and the Rancher Academy is also free. So all this content is free, right? So that's key. We build content that is useful, relevant, and then you take a leadership position in that field just because people understand that you know the subject, you understand the challenges, and then you provide content for people in the community to learn, to practice, and then to make progress in it. And then with the hope, of course, that they will choose Rancher as their platform, and they will come back when they're mature enough to come and come to a support contract with us. So the Rancher Academy was launched, I think, about 10 months ago or so. So this was a free course for people to get a certification, and the adoption has been very, very strong. I'll show you the numbers in a minute. And then we have master classes, which basically are how-to webinars, and then we have some trainings, and we can cover from industry expertise and understanding of the cloud native ecosystem to product specific information, to training, to certification. So there's and it's all there. We promote it very regularly. There's lots of paper to download, and the amount of content that we create for the community is massive. And that's where our biggest effort goes into. It's not just about us speaking at public event. It's not just about having a lead generation campaign. It's a totally separate part of the company, whereby on one hand we feed content to the community, and then we would get leads through specific targeting from accounts or specific targeting for verticals based on customer case study. But the two streams of lead generations are very different. From the open source community, it's about great content. The other side is to find the right decision makers and then tag them to specific use cases in similar industries. So here are some numbers which might be interesting to get a feel of how fast and how big these things are. So if you look at 2020, we have about 36,000 active deployment. So that's a lot more than our 400 paying customers. So the vast majority of active deployments, we would actually not really know, right? It's just happening, and that's the real benefit of an open source model, is that I'm leading a commercial organization, and actually the sales cycle in many instances already took place, right? So the people in the community would deploy the software, will test it, and when they come to us, they actually have already made probably 70%, if not 100% of the choice to go for Rancher. And then in other instances, we have to do prospecting and try to get to the right decision makers. But in many cases, Rancher is known, is used, and is being talked about in the community. And it's still growing a lot. I mean, we had 50% year-over-year growth on the number of deployments. But look at what's happening with K3S. I was mentioning about that. This is something that we launched about a year and a half ago, I think. It's growing at a much higher rate. That means that probably the product in itself, the technology, addresses an issue that the community likes, and that means that product has a great feature. Right? Longhorn, even more recent, 250% year-to-date growth. It's a storage solution. It's been developed by one of our engineers. It's been donated to the open source community, and it's getting a lot of adoption in the market. It's early, right? The product is ready to be used in production. Is it as good as maybe some commercial offering like Portworx or other in the market? Probably not. It's not as complex, right? But it will evolve there. But we just take one issue, we solve the issue, we issue the code, people test it out. It does the job for that specific use case. If there needs to be more use cases, we continue to develop that product into subsequent releases. In terms of certification, I was talking about the Rancher Academy. 10,000 people registered since we launched this, 1,400 certified. It's a great way to have people. There's a certain pride of being certified for Rancher, I noticed. So you see people putting it in LinkedIn that they received their certification. So this is another way as an open source business to rally your users around our technology and make sure that there's a certain belonging to the brand and to the fact that you as an individual, you've passed a certain level and you're now certified to use Rancher. That means you understand Kubernetes, and probably for this individual, it also gives them a better positioning even in the employment market if they want to go and work for other companies. If you could say, well, I am certified on this topic, which is the topic in the IT industry for the coming years, then that's good for them personally. And then we use Slack as a way of communicating with users. It's a big community. It's very much all sorts of topics being addressed, and we manage that Slack channel. We let the community interact amongst themselves, but we are ultimately the owner of that Slack channel to make sure that it works well. Now then the big question is, how do we fund all of that? Because we're having 250 people on the payroll, salespeople, marketing engineers, support engineers. It's expensive. And our resources are very specified on and skilled on this very specific topic, Kubernetes, which is also very in demand in the market. So we need to fund this, and the way we do it is by offering an enterprise subscription. That means that we offer on one hand, the break fix support, like 24/7 global support, which is really about the applications running in production. What happens if the cluster goes down, if the management server goes down? We do upgrading, we do patches, we do security breach fixes. So that is really the insurance that our customers buy in order to have us as a backer of the technology. We're the only one writing code on Rancher and on all the other products. So if something needs to be, if there's a bug fix to be done, we're the only one who can actually do that. And then the other piece of the enterprise subscriptions covers more the knowledge sharing and the best practices, because a lot of our tickets that we receive are actually not so much related to the fact that something is broken in the technology, but actually is much more questioning around storage, networking, how you do firewalling, how you do load balancing, how you configure certain things. It's much more about the how-to around Rancher and within Rancher than really the fact that there's something broken within the environment. So this onboarding services, it's about how do you take this technology and how do you help the customer to get value out of it much faster than if they would do it by themselves. So typically a customer would face an issue. Maybe he's an open source user, not on a support contract. They start to Google, they go in the community, they try to find it by trial and error. If they're under contract, they just open a ticket or they position a question on Slack and they get an answer within the hour, and then they can move on. And then we have a piece of consultancy services. We have a small consulting team that will do, architecture review, the training, and the deployment for the customers. So the whole concept of building value on top of a product that is free in essence is basically to figure out how do you get the customer through a journey whereby they'll be able to use the technology for free, but then they will pay for the services that they're getting. The support services is customer success services, which are basically taking the customer from an onboarding to an implementation and adoption to basically an optimization and grow phase, whereby all of these phases are a natural progression of the adoption of their microservices, of their container adoption within the company, and make sure that the investment that they're making in the first deployment is paying off because there's enough applications coming on the platform, there's enough people using it, and the projects are successful. So we built a number of standardized service offerings. We have a standardized customer success journey, and that is only available to our open source paying customers, right? So if you're a community user, you don't have access to that. Basically, you're on your own. You need to do it with the community, and mostly for enterprises or for top mid-market customers, this would be is mostly impossible. They really need that support from us in order to progress. And then the lower or the smaller the customers, they would probably not go for Rancher. They would consume some Kubernetes management platform from their cloud provider. They'll go to AWS or to Google or to Azure, and they will be able to consume the Kubernetes environment with the management capabilities that the cloud provider offers. So this is really more towards what the top mid-market and the enterprise and the government customers. So the value of having a customer pay for the support rather than go for a free version is that we support the Rancher piece, but then we also decided to support all of these embedded services which are part of the technology. So if you take Rancher, it does a lot of these things on the left, right? So monitoring, app management, networking, orchestration, of course, storage, the container engine piece for the run. So all of these things are in the platform, and we will take an SLA on that, and that's what the customer pays. But also, in addition, we understand this whole ecosystem, right? So because there's a lot of other vendors out there, and if something goes down or there's something that they get stuck, and they would ask us, and we can dive into these other pieces of technology and say, look, I see an issue with your container security issue, or there's a problem with your load balancer, or there's something going wrong with the way that you configured your Terraform. So we understand this. We're able to guide them to. They still have to decide whether they take a support contract with these third-party companies, but from our perspective, we'll be able to guide them and to do the root cause analysis. So that breadth of support is very appealing for our paying customers, and that's one of the big reasons that they are prepared to pay for something they could get for free. Then the SLA is very stringent in terms of what we support. So if you have an open source product, the service level determines actually the value of the support contract. So we have a very fast response time. We have different levels of severity, and then we support, different version of operating system or Docker, different version of Kubernetes. We also support hosted Kubernetes version. So we really have on one hand this big support matrix that determines what we support from all of these different open source technologies, but then we have an enterprise grade SLA in terms of answering the tickets and the queries from our customers. We had to invest, not just in engineers for the building of the technology, but we also had to invest in very capable support engineers. So in our company, I don't know the exact number of engineers. Say we might be with the support team and then the R&D team. There might be like half of the company might be engineers and the other half operations and sales, etc. So from an engineering perspective, pretty much every engineer or every support engineer could be an engineer building the product. So they're very well ingrained into the product and the ecosystem around it. So finding these people, is critical, because that's the only reason actually that anyone wants to pay for it, is because they have access to these support resources. So we're building this team further out. We do a follow the sun model, and as we're going to be acquired by SUSE, there'll be an even bigger footprint of support. But having local language, having people that really understand the technology in depth and are able to respond. I mean, I think our average response time is less than 15 minutes, and we have a very, very high customer satisfaction score. So then what we decided to do, and not many companies have that, we use Slack as a way to engage with the community of paying customers. So we have a public Slack, which I shared to you earlier, there's about 20,000 people or so. But then we have private Slack channels with our paying customers. That means that if you're a company and you have a team that is deploying Rancher and you're paying the subscription, you have a direct access to a pool of engineers, and you can ask any question that you want, and you'll get an instant response. Right? This is the most direct way of interacting with the support organization. It's not just with tickets, but this is a lot for a discussion, for advice, and it will go a lot faster. So this is one of the big benefits that we offer, is that we continue to have this informal, real-time almost conversation with customers using the software. And then in terms of recognition, and I'll happy to share these slides later on, is we measure ourselves against what is called the Net Promoter Score. So for us, it's about how big is the propensity from a Rancher paying customer to recommend our support model in our company to another one. So I think we're now up to the 80 or so. So the score continues to increase, but we're very high compared with a lot of our competitors. So that's one of the prerequisite. If we're charging them, sometimes we would charge, some customers pay us, maybe 300, 400,000, maybe more per year. They expect this level of support, and even though we're vastly cheaper than some of our competitors like VMware or Red Hat, the the expectation is that we're a challenger, right? We came in this market with a better product, but then we were the smaller one of all these companies. We differentiate ourselves by the level of expertise, and then the satisfaction that the customers give ourselves on the way that we support them. Okay, so that's what I wanted to take you through. I didn't want to really go into the pricing and how we structure that, but I'm definitely happy to take questions around that. So that's it. So that was my slide. I don't want to bore anyone with more content, but let's maybe open it up to some questions.
Boring. Thank you so much for the talk, Olivier. And we open up to the floor if anyone has any questions.
Can I ask one, Katie?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Olivier.
Yeah,
Amanda here. Hi. I have so many questions for you, but I don't want to take up all the time. I find it really fascinating because your model is a pure, I mean, obviously open source is not a business model, but the business model that you're talking about here is pure play open source, right? You're working from a community base, you're leveraging open source in the way that it most adds value to any business by building that community and having the benefits of the easy access into companies, right? So people adopt because they see a community project that's good and backed by a company. So, pure play open source. It's very difficult to make money on something you give away, as I found out in 5 years in Canonical. It's a tough ask. And we've seen lots of companies go open core because they've not worked their business model out before they've decided where they're going. I hear you today confidently talking about how you've run your business and recognizing both that your assets are people and your intellectual property, right? So it's these skilled engineers that bring people to you and the smart software that you've got. So it's not that you're trying to close people down on the IP, but that you're creating this wonderful IP and sharing it. So that's why people want to work with you and they trust that you have the best engineers. How have you managed not to go open core or close things down? How have you found that, magic fairy dust?
Yeah, it's a great question because the most of the time in a way we're competing with ourselves, right? So because the technology is great, so it starts with having a great technology, right? If you go open source, it has to be great, right? If it's open source and it's not great, then nobody's gonna use it, but then let's still not pay for it. So the reason for keeping everything open is that we believe that ultimately this space of Kubernetes is still in an early market. So that means that there's not a lot of knowledge, right? There's pressure to get something going around containers and microservices and the companies are embracing it, but they're not able to do it on their own, right? I think in 5 years' time, it will be a different story, right? If in 5 year time, the level of expertise in the market for Kubernetes is there, teams have been built up. Our pressure is to continue to add value on top of what is available in the open source community. So what we have now today is good. It's gonna help us, but you notice we had like this event yesterday, which was running Kubernetes on the edge, and we had 2,500 registration. Edge is still very early, right? But you will see there's a lot of communication from what we're doing is around edge, because we know that's the next frontier where there's a lot of things that will be disrupted, right? So it's been traditionally an area with incumbents with pretty proprietary software, and now with Kubernetes, there's a way to bring innovation in that front, but companies will also need to have help there. So I have about 10 projects on that area, right, which are most viable product type of projects. So to answer your question is, we have to stay ahead of the curve of call it commoditization of the technology, because when things get commoditized, look at Docker, look at Hadoop. at some point people know how to do it, and then they don't pay for it, and then you're left with a great technology, but you cannot monetize, and then we're gone, right? So, and that's what happened with Docker, right? They did great technology, everybody's using it, but nobody's paying for it, right? So their valuation went from very high to very low, and I think we're in the market whereby I said, less than 10% of applications are containerized. Kubernetes in itself is transforming. It used to be this technology to manage pretty much data center centric, pretty vertically integrated, pretty. It wasn't actually designed initially yet for multi-cloud and edge, and that's where it's going at the moment. So our CEO, so Sheng, and then Darren, etc. Their paranoia about losing relevance, right? And it's all about and getting relevance means that you need to be ahead for a year and a half or 2 years on what you think the market is going. So we look at right now, for instance, what we're looking at is the big cloud providers. Everybody will go to the cloud at some point, right? 5 or 6 years ago, it was about, the big enterprises, should I go to the cloud or do my private cloud? The last business of these founders of Rancher was on building private clouds, right? And building clouds for telcos to compete with Amazon. That battle is over, right? We know who the big cloud providers are, the hyperscalers. So everybody ultimately gets contracts with these guys. But so then now our next challenge is, how do I add another layer of value which makes the experience between these different cloud providers seamless, and still, be able to then sell my value to the community and make sure that people are prepared to pay for our expertise. So it's about talent, you're right. It's about what the expertise you have, but it's also about how do you solve specific problems through coding, right? If you code it into a tool and you add it with an expertise and you stay a year or two ahead of the mainstream, that model works. But it puts a high pressure on our company to innovate, because other companies, I don't want to talk bad about SUSE, but SUSE has been growing steadily, right? 10-15% over the last couple of years with a limited innovation, right? It's been good innovation, but it's not been revolutionary in the last couple of years, right? And the reason is that, they had a certain, at some point you have an installed base. Look at, same with VMware, some of the others, at some point you have a model whereby customers just have to pay to use you, right? And in our world, well, if you don't, you can get a software for free. So if we don't add value 1 year after the other, then why would they continue to pay for our expertise? So we have about, just to give you some numbers, we have about between 15 and 20% attrition every year, right? So we're still very much into this somewhat like hate POC phase for a lot of customers, right? Where they say, okay, I'm trying this, I need the expertise, and then after a year, or the project is successful, and then they will renew, or the project has failed, and then they won't renew. Or what we sometimes have is the project is so successful and the team is so good that they wonder, why do I really need Rancher, right? So I have that discussion, but then it's the next wave of value add that you need to bring on. What is the next journey? Or it's another team, or it's another use case. So it is putting a lot of pressure on keeping ahead of the curve from a innovation perspective. But on the good side, we're still so early. There's still so many people in these IT teams that have little to no clue about what this is all about, that they're going to come to us absolutely. Otherwise, they can't progress.
Yeah, I think a couple of things you said there to me are exactly what I've experienced, and I think are absolutely spot on. That keeping ahead of the game and constantly questioning your own relevance and understanding strategically where things are going, which means that you're constantly changing. Because the environment around you, things will come along that are unexpected.
Absolutely.
You've got to react to that constantly. And I guess from a business model perspective, what that means is you have to make a decision, as you guys have, that this is a point where we should sell this. You'll stay there for a period of time, I'm sure, but you will then go off and do something different, right? That's the nature of the beast. For many of you, you will come up with the next idea, whether it's edge or something else. And that constant... It puts people under a lot of pressure.
Also it can be within the company. Actually, I'm pretty confident that given, look at Sheng, our CEO, he will have like 10 times more engineer than he had within Rancher because of the acquisition.
Yeah.
And then, okay, where we think if Edge is the area, okay, let's have a look at what is the technology SUSE has, what do we have, and then we'll go and build something. We have some ideas because ultimately the stickiness is key, right? How do we? For us, is the big thing is how do we make Rancher sticky in a way that people want to keep us, but also want to keep paying for it. So, and the stickiness ultimately comes from the application layer, right? Ultimately, if we can inject something related to AI, or so deep learning or AI on the assessment of your estate, right? And predictive analytics around it, maybe something around fleet management for IoT devices. These applications, it might be that at some point they become options that people have to pay for to get the bigger piece, which is underlying iceberg, which is Rancher, right? And all the distribution. That could be another model. We haven't figured that out yet, but it could well be that you say, you know what, we have this great feature, like a little bit like what Elastic was doing, right? It used to be Elastic was open source, then they came with Kibana and other functionalities, and you have to pay for that. And it's a great model. It's actually the best model because you have the innovation is open source, but then you start adding value add applications, which companies, you know, whether they buy a support contract from us, whether they buy a subscription from another company, at the end of the day, they pay for the value they're getting for that piece of software. Yeah. So stay tuned. I mean, things will. I think we haven't found the magic piece, the magic stickiness yet. You know, it could also be in the way we deliver it. It could be if this is a cloud offering or SaaS offering for certain parts of Rancher, that's also more sticky than something that is just downloadable and installable by a customer on his premise. So there's various ways, and we will test them. But one thing is for sure, we'll stay fully open source on these open source projects that turn into supported products. It's just that the way that we offer them might change, and we might add more value on the application layer at some point.
That's cool. I would ask you more, but I know other people are waiting to speak to you, so thank you.
I have something I'd like to add to that, if that's all right. It's I think it's interesting because you're incentivizing the right thing. Like you're not paying for the software, you're paying for the people, and you want them to innovate. And it's like you've got to realize as a customer, you're paying for the people to make this better constantly. And it's kind of it's the right way to think. I don't just want to buy the software that the side effect is that you'll keep making it better. It's like I'll buy the people because they're making it better anyway, because they know that's the only, like, I have to pay for the people kind of thing. And I think the other point is interesting, the similarity, actually, you'd never think this, between law in private practice and actually from this, because you're paying for the people, and the people are the product rather than necessarily the output as such. And it's like, and that whole stickiness kind of thing is a real thing in law firms as well, of kind of how do I get people coming back to that sort of thing.
I think the key here is, though, because we're not a services company, right? So you can have if you take the example of a lawyer, it's different, right? A lawyer, you charge by the hour, right? Typically, right? And so if you don't work, there's no income, right? Rancher has a pretty interesting support model whereby it's a node-based, right? So the sizing of the deployment determines how much money we get from a customer, right? And on the support side, yes, we have resources, and the consultant, we have resources, but it's their time does not determine the revenue for Rancher. And that's the beauty of it. We almost have like a license-like commercial model, which is fulfilled by a professional services like of value, right? So and combining these two, you get the expertise, but then you pay for your estate, right? What you're using, instead of paying for a price per hour for a consultant. And I think that combination is pretty. That's been pretty smart so far, because that's why we can grow. I mean, we're growing more than 100% year over year in terms of revenue, and for the last couple of years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other people.
You're welcome.
We have a couple of other questions on the chat. So Kathleen, you first. Do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to go for it?
I don't mind. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can. Okay. I was wanting to ask, when you first started out with the company, how did you make clients feel that you could be trusted engineers? And how did you communicate your vision for the company in a way that they decided to use your service?
Yeah, so the way that typically this works is that in the beginning, you build something, and then you go and seek the first customers to help you develop your product. that's really the way it works. So and that might be a very Silicon Valley way of doing it, but it works really well. So the first version of Rancher was it wasn't called Rancher, it was called something different, and then they would go and find, let's say, from their previous company, I don't know, it could be IBM or it could be another customer that they have, or Intel, and they go and say, hey, we're trying to solve this problem. Do you want to pay us $150,000 and co-engineer this thing with us so that we do the right thing? And then you start to have your first viable product, and then you do that with a handful of customers you've had, or relationship, or companies that are actually open to that. Telcos are typically open to that. They have innovation teams, some of the larger tech companies that have that. And that's how you fund your first engineers. That's how you also make sure that you build something that is actually relevant for the market. So that's how we do it. And then you start to, in the case of Rancher, quite a few engineers came from the previous startup, so you tend to stick together with a core team. I also worked with the same team, so that makes it maybe a little bit easier. But if you start from scratch, it's all about getting a couple of early beta customers that are okay with your technology not being dry, but giving you feedback, and then you coding and seeking feedback, and then that's how you build basically the offering and the right product. And then, to be honest, the vision, you ask how you can make a vision in the early days it's a pretty tactical thing, right? So it's about, I have a problem, and we see this problem in the industry, and initially they started with actually addressing something completely different, and then they figured out actually that's not a big problem, and then so they stopped that one, and then they went to solve another one. And then when you find the right problem to solve, that's when you see the traction going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I never really thought about having a customer so early on.
Yeah, I don't know if it works everywhere, but my experience is if you have definitely in Silicon Valley, you have to have something to show, but it could be still a couple of months away from having a first version, right? And then there's always customers there that would like to, if it has to solve a real problem, right? But if it solves a real problem, even if it's early days, and as a matter of fact, I worked as an intern for 6 months or so for a company who was doing something that was very promising. It was about how do you manage, sending email attachments so that someone could not open it everywhere, etc. It looked great on paper, but the product actually never materialized. So I had a lot of meetings, lots of interest from banks and from lawyers, but unfortunately, they never really made the product work. So then, it didn't go anywhere. But everyone was very, very open to participate and to help driving the development of the product, because it was solving a real problem.
Yeah,
great.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And Christian, I believe you were next if you're there.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the talk. It's actually been really good. I had a question, because you talked a lot around the business model being on the services, the professional services side, things like support, that kind of stuff. I've been in kind of these other talks where company managers have kind of said they've been starting to build a business model around customer service, and they had difficulty scaling. So I wondered how you've tackled that, or how you approached that.
Yeah, so you need the scaling. So that's what I was saying. So there's a scaling element on the revenue which comes through the infrastructure, right? So it's basically the virtual machines and the nodes that determines the scaling on the revenue side, and that's pretty easy, right? That's just basically the more successful the platform, the more revenue you get in. Then you have to make sure that on the support organization you build the right structure. So it is, in our case, it starts with there's a couple of elements that you can do to scale. One is the quality of the onboarding of a new customer determines ultimately how many tickets you will get. If you're well prepared, if the design of the architecture that they have is validated by us, if there's a good onboarding happening, then you have much less cases coming to your support organization than if you let everybody do whatever they want, and then you see a lot of mistakes, and then they will go down. There will be lots of severity 1 cases. So a good design is important. The second one is a good, system, right? A good team whereby there's good, good management of customer information within the system. There's good a good supportability review is what we also do early, right? When they're signed, we do a review of what they have and what we can support and what we cannot support. So there's a good, and if things need to change in their architecture in order for us to support them. So, and then you have, we work with tools like Zendesk, Confluence, so these different tools which are available to manage a customer support organization. And then there's a third piece, which is around enabling our partners. So that's a piece of work we started to do, whereby partners are taking first level and second level of support, and we would take third level of support, so that actually there's a lot more granularity in the market to help us scale. And that is still early days, because actually there's not that many partners that really understand well Kubernetes and really understand well Rancher, but it's growing rapidly. We start to see 30% of our business is coming through partners at the moment in the last quarter, and we could see that actually the network of partners could be a great way to accelerate. But in general, I would say support organizations are pretty scalable. I mean, these days you can find good engineers everywhere.
Yeah, I guess they're scalable in the amount of people and the people you can find. But the question was, can you keep scaling the number of employees you have against the revenue and the number of customers? But I think your earlier answer, where great onboarding experience, so that the new customers coming on board minimizes the need for them to go through to contact channels. Because I mean, you mentioned that you have a contact channel on Slack where people are contacting you and you have like a 15-minute response time. I mean, that's incredible. And it's just like, you wonder how that scales when you have thousands and thousands of customers. But
I agree. I totally agree. I think it's I don't know yet how that is going to scale, right? We have 400 customers now. So... but you're right. It's definitely something. Especially actually in the discussion now with Suze, we're discussing that. How do we make sure, as we hype, if we're gonna grow tremendously the amount of customers, then we want to keep it, because the Slack piece is important, right? That's the quality of support and the recognition we get. So we have to find a way to scale it. But honestly speaking, there's at some point you have a baseline of knowledge, and then you can transmit some of that knowledge to others, and you can have buddy systems. So actually it becomes easier to onboard new people in the support organization. But we have to, and there's also an element of AI you can inject into your support organization, right? Whereby answers to questions can be found much easier, because it's always the same questions that come back, right? It's not like because you have 1,000 customers.
At the same time, you don't want to go down the telco. At the same time, you don't want to go down the telco route where it's like
exactly.
you type your email, your question into a chatbot, and you never end up speaking to a real person. But thank you for your answers. That's great.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. We're just going to go a couple of minutes over time so we can get through everyone's questions. And Phil, I think you were next. You're there.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much, Olivier. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
So I guess this maybe is a bit overlapping with Amanda's question, so apologies if so. But as said in the chat, if there's some of the companies that we've seen do a fully open source tool, and at some point that it's become a value add for AWS or whoever, rather than necessarily the original company. I guess, as you say, you get to a stage where it's commoditized, and then it really doesn't matter who's doing it. But there's that in between point where it becomes easy for someone who's using AWS to just go to AWS instead and use a built-in service. How do you kind of mitigate against that risk?
Yeah, it's a great question, because if I look maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the competition was pretty much Red Hat OpenShift. I mean, that was the competition. Docker Swarm. So some of these technologies that would deploy Kubernetes predominantly on-premise and maybe in a hybrid scenario. Now you see that the big cloud providers all start to also offer their hybrid solution, right? So you have Outpost from AWS, you will have Anthos from Google, and all of these solutions are there to actually put the experience of the public cloud also on premise for the customers. So that means from a value add perspective, we need to go also one level. You need to go one level up, right? So that means that you always need to provide more than what the cloud provider can provide. So the cloud providers, they will never be able to compete exactly on the seamless developer experience yet, right? Because for them, at the end of the day, it's very good that a company like Rancher exists, right? Because I think to your point is ultimately we attract workloads to their cloud, right? Because we enable this hybrid multi-cloud management of clusters. So ultimately, we're providing a seamless experience to potential new customers for them, right? So we did a lot of events with Microsoft, with AWS, with Google. We do a lot of roadshows together. So, pre-COVID, we had roadshows everywhere, right, with these guys, and they were very, very happy. Where you Google Rancher and Amazon, you will see we promoted on their website for their IoT solution, right? I think it's called Snowflake or Snowball, something that the Snow product family of that, which is really for IoT, and they actually shipped that with Rancher and K3S. So we compete, but we're also partners. So that means that in terms of the danger of being commoditized, if you're not adding anything else than what the cloud provider provides, and they will always be able to provide it at a potentially cheaper price because they'll monetize on the underlying infrastructure, right? And that's a big danger. I think in general, that's the big danger in IT at the moment, is that you get this big dominance of the big cloud provider, and they can kill any innovation if they want, right? Amazon can actually replicate or copy everything or buy everything, and every company end up building services which will be offered by a big cloud provider to fill their data centers. And that's where I think it's not. I don't know if legally, the U.S. government will change something around this big dominance of these cloud providers, but at some point it starts to kill the innovation, because it's now very difficult. If you're a new company, you build something, what's the likelihood that this is not going to be killed or bought by Google, and then you keep creating these big mastodons, which is the new monopoly, right? So I think that in a way you have to be non-threatening to them, and then seek the partnership whereby the value that you bring is high enough for the customer to pay for the cloud provider and to pay for your technology. From the moment that the value is not high enough anymore, they'll just go full for the cloud provider. That's for sure, right? Because that's ultimately where the industry is going.
Christian's got another question, but I think Stuart, did you have a question for there? Hello.
I didn't have a question, no.
Okay. No. So Christian, do you want to ask your question?
Okay, yeah, just a kind of maybe a wrap-up question. I think what you're doing is really cool. I was listening to a podcast just the other day about how IBM are splitting themselves, and they have their legacy technologies going into one company, and the kind of the other part, which I guess is the one they really want to focus on, is going to be looking at building services around hybrid cloud. Not so much, I think, providing their own cloud technology, but looking at how they can help companies kind of provision and orchestrate between like AWS, Azure, on site and all this kind of stuff. Do you see that as a threat? Do you see how would you see that?
Yeah, so I mean that's where the market is going, right? That was to my point is in the beginning, Kubernetes was about, okay, I deploy microservices, deploy containerized application in my data center, and I need something to manage that, right? That's how it initially started, right? Then Kubernetes evolved to be managing these hybrid environments, some on-premise, some in the cloud, and then now it becomes this, well, actually I need multi-cloud, I need hybrid, and I need potentially also applications on the edge. So that is where everybody ultimately is going, right? So that's the next wave, because as cloud adoption increases, companies, they'll typically have one cloud provider, but then they will have by design a second cloud. It's almost like an exit strategy, right? If instead of locking yourself fully into one cloud, and there's different reasons, right? It could be a governance thing, an exit cloud. It could be like an exit strategy. It could be availability zones more present in one region of the world than another. So the multi-cloud component will remain there. And if you look at you go on our website, you'll see there's like a nice Forrester report, and it actually changed from container management to multi-cloud management, because that's ultimately the experience that developers will want. They will want to go for specific functionalities to one cloud provider, for others somewhere else. So, but ultimately, helping customers to move from on-premise to hybrid to multi-cloud is what everybody is doing, right? That's what the telcos are doing. You take Cisco Systems, for instance, take Fujitsu. That's what these guys are doing, right? They're going and to help organizations to go through their cloud native transformation. They might run their SAP workloads in the cloud instead of on-premise, right? They might run other applications in their own data center because it's so data sensitive. So the move of IBM is the move of the entire industry, right? Everybody wants to play into that portability, governance, and management of these multi-cloud environments. So yeah, is it a threat? I mean, of course, IBM, Red Hat are competitors of ours. With SUSE acquisition will be will be a bigger company together to compete with that. But we also have a lot of partners that will use Rancher to offer that offering. Take Cisco Systems in Germany, they offer that to their customers, and they say, look, we will manage this multi-cloud offering for you, but then they use Rancher embedded as the piece of technology that they're leveraging to do that.
So potentially opportunity as well as threat.
Totally.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Olivier.
You're welcome.
That's a really good note to bring today's meeting to a close. So thank you so much again, Olivier, for
more than welcome.
giving us your talk. It was really interesting, and we'll let you go and have your lunch now. But next week we've got Frank Karliczek talking about why the GPL is great for business, and I've also got an administrative process change. So registrations will be via Eventbrite, and that will go live on Monday. So hopefully we look forward to seeing lots of you there next week. Thank you very much, and thanks again, Olivier.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
You too. Thanks.